There's one photo left on my drive from that trip. Just one. I deleted the other 73 the morning after I got the police report back, and I still don't know why I kept the last one. I look at it maybe once a month, not because I want to, because I keep hoping I'll see something different in it. I've been shooting wildlife at night for close to 12 years, mostly on contract for a couple of small nature magazines that don't really exist anymore. August of 2021. I drove up to Glacier for a solo week, focused on the east side of the park. Nothing unusual about that. I've done 100 trips like it. You pick your spots during daylight, you scout the tracks, you set up your gear before dusk, and then you sit, sometimes for 6 hours. Sometimes you don't get a single frame worth keeping. That night, I worked 3 locations. First one was a meadow near 2 Medicine. Second was a stretch of creek about 40 minutes north. Third was a game trail I'd used before, up a service road off Cut Bank. I moved between them slow, packed light, kept my headlamp on red. Nothing felt wrong. That's the part that still gets me. I'm supposed to notice things. That's the job. You learn to hear a footfall that isn't a deer's before you can even name what's different about it. And I heard nothing all night. I got back to the cabin I was renting outside East Glacier around 4 in the morning, ate a sandwich standing over the sink, slept until noon, made coffee, sat down at the laptop. The first batch was from the meadow. I pulled them up in Lightroom and started my usual pass, culling the throwaways. Third or fourth image in, I stopped. There was a shape at the tree line, long lens, so the trees were compressed, but you could still see it. A person, just standing there behind the second row of pines. You could see the shoulders and part of the head, no face. The exposure wasn't for that distance, but the silhouette was obvious once you knew where to look. My first thought was another photographer. It happens, not often at 1 a.m. in a meadow 20 minutes from the nearest pull-off, but it happens. I tagged the frame and moved on. Next photo, same figure. Different position, maybe 30 feet to the left of where he'd been. I sat back in the chair, took a sip of coffee, went to the next frame. There he was again. I want to describe this correctly because it matters. He wasn't running through the shots, he wasn't crossing the frame, he was posted. Every image, he had picked a spot in the tree lean where the shadow was deepest, and he was standing in it, not hiding, exactly, just placed, like he knew where my lens couldn't quite reach, and he stayed right on that edge. By the time I finished the meadow batch, 23 photos, he was in every one. I remember getting up and walking to the window. The cabin looked out on gravel and a stand of aspen, and it was full daylight, and there was a couple loading kayaks onto their SUV about 40 yards away. Normal Tuesday. I stood there for a while, then I went back and opened the creek folder. Different location, 40-minute drive. I'd changed lenses, changed my setup completely. Wasn't even facing the same direction. 29 photos. He was in every one of those too. Same silhouette. I could tell by the shoulders and the way he held his head, kind of tilted, like he was listening more than watching. In one frame, he was maybe 60 yards out, standing in the water where the creek widened. Just standing in it, up to about his shins. It was, I think, 48 degrees that night. He wasn't dressed for it. You could see he had a jacket, but nothing that would make sense for standing in a Montana creek in the dark. I got up and I threw up in the kitchen sink. That's a detail I don't share with people, but it's what happened. I hadn't even opened the third folder. Cut Bank was 22 photos. Same man. He was closer at that site. Closest frame had him maybe 40 feet from where I'd been set up, behind a downed spruce. Only his head and one hand visible over the log. The hand was flat on the wood, not griping, just resting there. I sat there for a while trying to convince myself these could be 3 different people. Hikers, maybe. Guys out spotting animals with their own gear. I zoomed in on the shoulders in the meadow shots, then jumped to the creek shots, then to Cut Bank. Same slope of the shoulders, same way the head sat on the neck, same jacket, as far as I could tell in the pixels I had. It was one person, 74 photos, 74 instances of one man. He never once moved into a spot where the flash or the ambient would have caught his face. Not once. In 3 separate locations across probably 9 miles of park, he had followed me and stayed in the exact narrow band of shadow my equipment couldn't resolve. I called the ranger station that afternoon. The woman who answered, her name was Chris, and she was very calm about it in a way that made me more scared, not less. She said, "Bring the laptop in. Don't email anything. Just come." They took it seriously. I want to say that clearly because I've seen people online assume rangers brush this stuff off. They didn't. 2 rangers and eventually a sheriff's deputy sat with me in a back office for close to 3 hours. They pulled every frame up on a bigger screen. They asked me the route, the times, the gear, whether I'd told anyone my plans. I hadn't. I never do. That's part of why I like the work. They sent a team out the next morning to all 3 sites. I don't know exactly how many people. They found some boot prints at Cut Bank that didn't match mine, but the ground was dry and they couldn't get a clean read. No camp, no trash, no cigarette ends, nothing at the other 2 sites at all. Whoever he wasn't sleeping out there. He'd come in for me and gone back out. They ran the images through some kind of enhancement software down in Kalispell. I got a call about 10 days later from the deputy. He said the figure was definitely a real person, not a reflection, not a sensor artifact, not a trick of the long exposures. Male, probably 5'10" to 6 foot, wearing dark layered clothing and what looked like a soft brim hat. That was the whole description they could give me. He said they'd keep the file open, but there was nothing to work with. No face, no prints they could match, no motive anyone could point to. He asked me, near the end of the call, if I had any enemies. I laughed at that, and then I stopped laughing because I realized he wasn't joking. I don't shoot alone at night anymore. I go with a partner, or I don't go. I've turned down 2 contracts because of it. That's fine. I can afford to be picky at this point. I deleted 73 of the photos the same afternoon I got the deputy's call. I don't know why I kept the last one. It's from Cut Bank near the end of the sequence. He's the closest he ever got in any frame, maybe 30 feet, and he's stepped just far enough out from behind the spruce that his face is caught by the edge of my flash. Not clearly, you can't ID him from it, but you can see the eyes. He's looking directly into the lens. Not at me, at the camera, like he knew exactly where it was pointed the whole time, and he was waiting for the one frame where he'd let it see him. The job came in on a Tuesday. Mid-sized logistics firm off the Katy Freeway wanted a full data security audit before their Q1 board review. Standard work. 2 weeks on site, review their internal systems, write up findings, cash the check. I'd done maybe 40 of these in the last 5 years. Houston in November is that weird stretch where the mornings feel like October and by 2 p.m. you're sweating through your shirt. I checked into a Residence Inn about 10 minutes from the client's office, an 8-story glass building sitting off a service road with a chain restaurant on one corner and a Wells Fargo on the other. Nothing about it stood out. That was almost the point. The head of IT, a guy named Devin, met me in the lobby the first morning. Polite, tired, wire-rimmed glasses, handed me a temporary badge with a red border and walked me through the floors I'd need access to. 2nd floor was operations, 4th was finance, 6th was executive. The rest was a mix of cubicles and empty conference rooms with names like Magnolia and Cypress. The whole building smelled faintly like carpet cleaner and reheated coffee. Devin showed me my desk in a small, windowless room on the 5th floor, said I'd have full read access to their document management system, their email archive, and their internal chat platform. He was apologetic about the chat piece, said their previous auditor hadn't wanted access to it, but he'd been told to give me everything. Everything I flag stays in my report, I told him. Nothing walks out on a thumb drive. He nodded like he'd heard that before and left. The first week was normal. Their permission structure was a mess, which is standard. Half the finance team had access to HR files they shouldn't have. A shared drive from 2017 was still sitting on the network with resumes and salary data anyone could open. I logged it all and moved on. The thing I noticed first was the calendar system. When I was cross-checking who accessed what after hours, I kept seeing the same group of people in the building past 9 p.m., not every night. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 14 people, more or less the same 14 every time, mixed departments, 2 from finance, 3 from ops, 1 VP, the rest scattered. I didn't think much of it at first. Companies have late-night crews. But the badge logs showed them all entering the 7th floor, which was listed on the building directory as storage and mechanical. No offices up there, no reason for a VP of supply chain to be swiping in at 9:47 on a Thursday. I asked Devin about it, casually, over coffee in the break room, just curious what was on 7. HVAC and old file storage, he said. Some of the leadership does a Bible study up there. It's an old thing, predates me. Okay. Fine, that's normal. Corporate Bible studies exist. I noted it and moved on, except 2 days later, I was pulling a sample of internal chat messages to test their retention policy, and I filtered by a keyword I'd flagged from an HR complaint I'd read the day before. The word was elevation. Someone in HR had written a memo about an employee complaining that a manager kept using the word in performance reviews in a way that made them uncomfortable. Vague, no specifics. HR closed it as unsubstantiated. The keyword search pulled back 240 messages across 7 months, all from the same 14 people, all in a private group chat that wasn't visible on the platform's main directory. Devin's global read access included it because he'd set up the platform, but I'd bet money he didn't know it existed. I opened the chat. I want to be careful here about what I say. I read maybe 30 messages, enough to understand what I was looking at. It was not a Bible study. There was language about members and non-members, about who was ready and who wasn't. There were references to sessions on 7 and to something they called the offering, which from context was money, not the other thing I first thought. There was a running discussion about a woman in accounting who had been identified and how to bring her in slowly through social invitations. She was named. Her whole schedule was in there. What time she got to her car, which nights her husband worked late. There was a message from a VP about a former employee who had left the arrangement the previous spring. The tone was not concerned. It was procedural. There was talk of loose ends, and someone had responded with a thumbs up and the phrase already handled. I did not know what that meant. I did not want to know what that meant. I closed the tab. I sat in that windowless room on the 5th floor, and I could hear the HVAC in the ceiling, and a phone ringing 2 doors down, and someone laughing in the hallway. My hands were fine. My breathing was fine. What I felt was something closer to a filing cabinet sliding shut in my chest. I had a decision to make, and about 6 seconds to make it. I did not screenshot the chat. I did not export it. I did not copy a single line of it to my personal notes. Every keystroke I made in their system was logged, and I did not know who watched the logs. Devin said he did. Devin might. Someone else in that group of 14 might also. I did not know. That was the piece I could not get past. Any one of the smiling people who had walked me to the printer that week could have been on that list. I finished my audit. I stayed the 2nd week. I ate lunch at my desk. I stopped taking the elevator alone if I could help it. I wrote up the permissions issues and the retention gaps and the shared drive from 2017. I sat across from Devin on my last day and walked him through the report and shook his hand and drove to the airport and flew home. I want to say I slept that night. I did not, particularly. But I did not do anything either. I sat with it for about a week. I kept thinking about the woman in accounting who did not know her own name was in a file. Then I opened the FBI tip form on their website, the anonymous one. I put in the company name and the address. I said there appeared to be an organized group operating out of a specific floor of the building outside of business hours, involving named senior employees, and that the group's internal communications suggested financial coercion of members and the targeting of specific non-members for recruitment. I said I had come across this information in a professional capacity and could not share the underlying documents. I did not include my name or my firm's name. I did not describe what I did for a living in any way that would narrow it down. I hit submit. I closed the laptop. I did not check the form again. 6 months later, I was in an airport in Denver, sitting at a gate, half watching a TV mounted above the seating area. A local Houston news segment cycled through on the crawl at the bottom. The company name went by. I looked up in time to catch the anchor's face and the logo behind her and one line of the chyron before the story changed to weather. I did not pull it up on my phone. I did not search for the story on the flight. I have not searched for it since. I still take corporate audits. I do not take work in Houston. The account was small enough that I was the only consultant on site. That's the only reason I noticed. A team of 3 would have split the workload and nobody would have gone deep into the mail archive. It was a mid-sized logistics firm in Baltimore, off Boston Street, near the harbor. Around 90 people, 3 warehouses in Dundalk, and a fleet that mostly ran up and down the Shavar 95 corridor. I was there to do an operational audit, cost centers, workflow bottlenecks, the usual. March 2021, so everyone was still doing the mask dance in the hallways, and half the office was working from home on any given day. My contact was a woman in accounting named Rita. She set me up in a glass conference room on the 2nd floor with a spare laptop and read access to most of the internal systems. Coffee machine down the hall, view of the parking lot, decent Wi-Fi. I told her I'd try to stay out of everyone's hair. The first 2 weeks were dull. Spreadsheets, interviews with dispatchers, a very long conversation with a fleet manager about tire rotation costs. I was ahead of schedule and starting to draft the interim report when I ran a routine query on the mail server. Nothing dramatic, just pooling storage stats by user because the IT guy mentioned they were running out of space on the archive drive and asked if I could poke at it. That's when I saw the line for a man I'll call Preston. He was an operations manager, late 40s, always in a golf polo, kept a framed photo of his daughter on his desk. I'd interviewed him twice. He was polite, gave short answers, laughed at his own jokes. Nothing about him stuck. His mailbox was over 400 gigabytes. For context, the CEO's mailbox was 12. The whole executive team combined didn't come close to what Preston had. I filtered by sender and recipient. Roughly 90% of the volume was mail he'd sent to himself. Same address in the from and to fields. I sorted by date. The first one landed in late November of the previous year. After that, one every single weekday, sent between 6:48 and 6:53 in the evening, right after most of the office cleared out. I opened one. The subject line was a random string of characters, like someone had mashed the keyboard. The body was blank, but the message size was 90-something megabytes, so there had to be an attachment, except there wasn't. Not in the preview, not in the pane at the bottom. The paperclip icon showed up in the mail list, but when I clicked the message, Outlook showed me an empty email. I sat there for a minute. I remember I could hear the HVAC kick on above the ceiling tiles. I called the IT guy, Marco, and asked him if he could pull one of Preston's messages off the server directly as a raw file. I told him I was trying to figure out why the archive was ballooning. He said, sure, gave me an EML in about 10 minutes. I opened it in a text editor, scrolled past the headers, and there it was, an attachment, base 64, encoded, hidden with a file name that started with a period and had no extension the mail client recognized. Standard Outlook just skipped over it. On the raw file, it was clearly there, about 90 megabytes of encoded data. I decoded it out of curiosity, on my own laptop, in the conference room with the door closed. It was a compressed archive, password protected. I did not try to crack it. I want to be clear about that. I sat there staring at the little icon, and my hand actually pulled back from the trackpad. I already didn't like where this was going. I went back to the mail server and pulled a different day. Same structure, same attachment format, different file name, ran a quick script to list the sizes of every hidden attachment in his self-sent mail, going back to November. The pattern was ridiculously consistent, between 80 and 100 megs, 5 days a week, for 4 months. That night, I went back to my hotel on Pratt Street and thought about it over a plastic tray of pasta from the place next door. I kept telling myself there was a boring answer, some backup habit, some old IT workaround, a guy who didn't trust cloud storage. storage. People are weird about their files. The next morning I went in early and pulled one of the archives onto an air-gapped machine I keep for client work. I don't know exactly what I expected. Some spreadsheet full of side business receipts, maybe. Client lists he was planning to walk out with. That's the kind of thing you find in audits sometimes. The password wasn't complicated. It was the company's founding year followed by his daughter's name. I got in on the third try, which I still feel a little sick about. Inside were video files, a lot of them. Highly compressed, low frame rate, but readable. The file names were timestamps. I clicked the most recent one. It was footage from a hallway camera on the second floor, the one outside the women's restroom. Wide angle. You could see the door and the little alcove where the water fountain is, and part of the stairwell. Someone walked into frame. I closed it before it played more than a few seconds. I already understood. I opened 3 more, spaced weeks apart, just enough to confirm what I was looking at. Different cameras. The break room. A camera in the back stairwell that I honestly hadn't even known existed. One angle from inside a supply closet, pointed out through a cracked door. There were names in some of the folders. First names. Short ones. 4 of them. I closed the laptop and I sat in that conference room for about 20 minutes without moving. My hands were cold. I could hear Rita laughing at something 2 rooms over. I did not confront him. I did not tell Rita. I finished my coffee, packed up my things like it was any other day, and drove back to the hotel in the middle of the afternoon. The traffic on Boston Street was slow because of construction, and I remember gripping the steering wheel too hard the whole way. I told the front desk I'd be checking out a day early. That night, I wrote a memo, short, factual, no adjectives, mailbox sizes, hidden attachment structure, sample file names, the fact that they contained internal security footage taken outside business hours, the names on the folders transcribed exactly as I'd seen them. I attached one of the archive files as evidence, with the password written out on a separate page. I sent it to the head of legal directly, CCing the CEO, from my agency's encrypted address. I bypassed the operations chain entirely, which meant bypassing Preston, who was technically the person who'd hired me. In my cover letter, I said I was concluding the engagement early and would waive the remaining fees. Legal called me the next morning. A very calm woman asked me 3 or 4 questions and thanked me for the level of detail. She said not to discuss it with anyone at the company. I said I wasn't planning to. I found out the rest secondhand from Marco weeks later over a phone call he probably shouldn't have made. There had been an internal investigation. Preston was walked out on a Friday. The archives went to Baltimore County Police. Marco said the official memo used the phrase, unauthorized recording of employees, and nothing more specific than that. He didn't know who was on the tapes. He didn't want to know. I never went back into that building. My agency reassigned the account to a colleague who wrapped up the audit remotely. I don't know what happened to Preston after the police got involved, and I have not looked. I know if I look, I will find something I do not want to carry around. The one detail that stayed with me is the timing, 6:48 to 6:53. That was the window he'd chosen, right after the cleaning crew came through. The hallways were empty by then, and the cameras were still on, and he was alone in his office with the door shut, sending himself files. He was polite in his interviews, short answers. The photo of his daughter on the desk.